I'll be brief. I think maybe what's best for me to do, since I'm actually working on both Uyghur stuff and Hui material, to talk about some ideas that link both of those. And in particular, I want to talk about a way of understanding Muslims in China that I see bridging both foreign scholars like us and the Chinese state's own understanding of Islam in China, which I think is problematic. And that is the notion of syncretism, which has driven in particular so much of the scholarship on the Hui, but also has some role in the study of the Uyghurs too. Syncretism is this idea that, in this case, a good concrete way to look at it is the idea that there is a thing called Islam and a thing called China, and when they come together, that you get something new, a mix of two discrete entities. And these discrete entities are imagined in the through the model of syncretism to have their own essential fixed identities that are more or less stable across time. And that is, for the non-academics in the audience, this is the way of looking at the world called essentialism. There are certain traits that make one Chinese in your culture or whatever. There are certain traits that make one a true Muslim or are characteristic of the true Islam. And then there are other characteristics that are sort of a less authentic Islam. And what the idea of syncretism does is takes a whole host of evidence that Islam is in fact Chinese and China is in fact Islamic over the last 1,000 years to one degree or another. It takes all of that evidence, the multitude of mosques across China, the fact that hundreds of millions of Chinese people participate in Hui foodways every day when they eat, the long integration of Muslims into the political history of China. It takes all of this evidence that China is in fact, that Islam is in fact a core part of Chinese history, and it quarantines them in this little safe jar of a syncretized thing, which is neither truly Chinese nor truly Islamic. And we can see a version of this term syncretism in the Chinese language scholarship on Islam in China, and that is Jiaorong, and it is quite popular, was quite popular before this Sinicization movement. And I suspect that some of the energy in the state's Sinicization push comes from the official state-supported study of Islam in China, with its own focus on Jiaorong, which was developed in part in conversation with Western scholars and the syncretism model, which you can find going all the way back to the arrival of Christian missionaries in the late 19th century in China. So let me, we're getting toward the end of our time, so I want to be super brief, but there are two examples that have already come up today that I think are good ways of pointing out really the ludicrousness of an essentialist and syncretic approach here. One, I think David pointed out something that's often missed in this conversation about Arabization. He pointed out that in fact, many of these mosques that are being damaged because they are too, quote, Arab, their style is closer to what you would find in India, when he pointed out that these are Mughal. Now, why would the Chinese state look at all of these mosques? And I would say that in general, the mosques with domes in China tend to look more like Indian mosques in India. Why would they look at this clear evidence and ascribe it all to Arabia or Arab influence? That, I would argue, is because of the racialization of Islam that often comes with, that is a part of Islamophobias around the world, and comes with the essentialist idea, where Islam is something that comes from Arabia 𝗦𝗫𝗏𝗏 is essentially Arab forever. Never mind that for over 1,000 years, most Muslims have not lived in Arabia. And so you get this racialization where the real Muslims, and therefore the more dangerous Muslims, are the ones that are racially similar to people in the Arab world. And this is one of the things that explains why Sinicization has had such a different effect on Uyghurs, who are seen as racially more like Arabs than it has on the Hui. So you have Uyghur children being taken away and raised essentially as Han Chinese. You don't have that kind of thing among the Hui. The other thing I wanted to touch on, which was already mentioned, Hannah Thieker mentioned that the very important point that Islam has been around in China for a long time. I think we can get some value from looking at it from the other end, which is that China has been in Islam for a very long time. If we want to imagine an Islam that doesn't include China, we're basically looking at the first 100 years of the history of Islam. You know, there are Muslims arriving in China probably within the first century of Islamic history. So there's really not much left to Islam if we cut out all of the periods in which there were interactions between Muslims or by Muslims in China. So if we turn back to the mosques for just a moment, let's ask why it is that a minaret has become more Chinese when it is turned into a pagoda. The pagoda, as many people on this call will know, is generally attributed as a borrowing from Buddhist stupas, which of course came originally from India. But the pagoda is, and Buddhism also, are considered by the Chinese state to be essentially Chinese. So why is one borrowing Chinese and another borrowing not? Well, this is the magic of essentialism, where you freeze certain cultural traits from a certain period of time, project them backwards in time, project them forward in time. And so I think this is something we need to be very careful about. It leads to the idea that Islam is incompatible with some essential immutable Chinese culture. And it is ultimately the intellectual fuel for the Sinicization program. And it's something that I think it's easy to do. It's easy to slip into. We're raised to think in essentialist ways. I don't think it's something to be ashamed of, but it does creep into our scholarship. And scholars in China are picking up on it, and it's giving support to them. Thank you.